Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university.
Welcome to State of Wellbeing. I'm Caitlin Walters, the Wellbeing Specialist, and joining me today is
Lorna Saboe Wounded Head. I am the Family Resource Management Field Specialist for SDSU Extension.
Thank you for joining me again, Lorna. I know you and I recorded an episode earlier on in the semester, but we wanted to come back and kind of talk a little bit more financial literacy. This episode, we really wanted to focus on kind of what it looks like when you maybe move off campus, maybe you're getting ready to graduate, and how we budget and save money when we're moving off campus and we're moving on to, the next steps in our lives.
Mhm.
So I wanted to start with maybe just kind of a basic question, but why is it important to have a budget right after graduating from college?
The most important reason, I think, is so that you can really just make decisions about how much you can afford to have for housing, transportation, and those other necessary expenses. If you have been a college student, most likely you're going to be in two different situations once you graduate. Either you've got a job lined up and you know there's going to be some steady income coming in, or you're still job hunting. And it you're most likely your housing is going to change. You're probably going to have a little bit more expensive, maybe a nicer housing. You might be in a situation where you're going to need to purchase a car or your transportation expenses are going to change, but you still want to be able to eat, have the clothes that you need to have and that type of thing. So really just to be able to help plan and to make decisions, because if you know your income, what your income is going to be, that's going to determine, how much you can spend on housing. Maybe you're still going to need to share housing with someone for a while until you kind of build up that savings and build up, kind of a cushion in your account. Or maybe you're going to be able to just, rent an apartment or whatever the arrangement might be. But really, it's just that decision making, giving you a little bit of sense of control to make those decisions.
Well, and I would say too that if you're listening to this and maybe you're not graduating, it's probably important to have that budget even before graduating so that you know you already know the skill, you already have that dialed in, and it makes it much easier to know what your income's going to look like and how you're going to budget leaving college. So I would say it's never too early to start working on a budget. And if you're interested in that episode, I would go back and listen to mine and Lorna's episode in January because I think we covered a lot of how to budget while you're in school. And I think if you can just extend that and build that skill while you're in school, it's much easier once you graduate.
Absolutely. If you're in the habit of budgeting and you know what your expenses are, things will change. The numbers will most likely get bigger for those expenses, but you're in that habit and have that understanding of what your spending habits might be and how they might change too.
This one I thought was interesting, but what are some of the biggest financial mistakes that you see new grads make?
I would say the biggest mistake is really just not realizing how expensive things are going to be. And, not realizing that, you think, well, this is how much money I spent in college on housing and those basic necessities. I'm going to make X times, however much I've been making previously. But the thing is, you're going to have, maybe you're not going to share those expenses. You're going to have those expenses on your own. You're going to have to most likely incorporate student loan payments with that. You might have more like work-related expenses that you didn't necessarily have. So just kind of realizing how much it's going to cost and how much, even as big as that paycheck may seem, it it's might it might not feel like that once you start paying bills and actually start going month to month. So that's, as you're looking at that, doing a little bit of research before you graduate, like where you might want to live, where and how much really things are costing. I just heard a podcast this morning about how the costs of basic goods are going to start to increase. And I mean, that's going to include housing, that's going to include like the cost of gas for your car, all those kind of things. And that really is going to cut into your entertainment and your kind of the fun things that you might want to do once you graduate.
I would add too, one that I see is, new grads who maybe get that first job or get that first like salaried position. Maybe they hear, okay, my salary is going to be, let's say, $60,000 a year. That doesn't mean that you're getting $60,000 a year directly into your bank account. It means, there are some things that are taken out of that. Maybe your health insurance for your work, or you don't really get to opt out of Social Security payments. Those are things that are part of your paycheck, and you are getting that money, but it is not coming directly into your bank account. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Right. So that, your gross income might be 60,000, but you've got federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare tax are coming out. Depending on the benefits that you receive, you might have to be paying like an insurance premium, whatever that might look like. There might be, hopefully, you have a retirement plan through your employer, and so that money is going to come out of there too. You're going to have some options like a health savings account or flexible benefits account and some things like that. And so, you take 60,000, divide that by 12, that's not what you're going to get every month. You have to think about those kind of things. So your monthly paycheck could almost be reduced by like 20%, 20 to 25% for your take home pay, depending on what those benefits are that come out of those paychecks. So as a little note for new employees, when you are hired, make sure you ask the questions about the benefits and how they're paid. And I mean, in some cases, benefits are pre-tax, so that will reduce your tax liability, so that will save you some money. But you want to make sure you have a good understanding of what that take-home pay is going to be.
I would also add, this is from personal experience. I went from working, for a nonprofit, and I was paid biweekly every 2 weeks. And I accepted my first job that was a salaried position at a university. And my first couple weeks, I'm like, okay, where's my first paycheck? I had never asked and never knew that they were paid monthly. And that does also kind of change how you budget when you're getting that paycheck monthly instead of bi-weekly. It does change how you have to like think about your bills and maybe be a little bit smarter about your budgeting, I think.
Oh, that's a really, really good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yes, if you're used to, weekly paychecks or bi-weekly paychecks, it takes a little bit different planning to make sure that, say you get paid on the first, make sure you still have that money to pay those bills that maybe you're due on the 20th. You can always pay bills early. So if you set things up, but then you also want to make sure you have that cash flow so that you can buy groceries, put gas in your car, and those kind of things. So there is a resource that's called a cash flow budget, and you can always reach out to me. I have a great template for setting that up. But basically, you just look at it's basically a worksheet that looks like a calendar where you list what all your bills are and what your paycheck is, and you can just kind of plot out like how much cash flow you're going to have once all those bills are paid and kind of where those happen. It works really well when you're, paid bi-weekly, but also it's a good planning for that monthly paycheck or just that change in that paycheck that you're getting, so that you can make sure that you're meeting those bill obligations.
So I think another thing to think about when we think about graduating is that start, maybe if you took out student loans, is the start of the repayment of student loans. What would be your advice for someone managing student loan payments alongside rent and other bills?
So the first thing to do is once you graduate is what is your grace period? So when is like how much time do you have before those payments kick in? For federal student loans, it's 6 months. So if you graduate in May, in November, you're probably going to have to start making payments. Learn about how much your payments are going to be. And if you look at that amount and are like there's no way I can make that payment, then apply for an income-driven repayment plan that will that will reduce your monthly payment. There's other also factors associated with that too that needs to be considered. But another trick that I encourage people to do is to pretend like you're making those monthly payments before the payments are due. So let's say your student loan payment is $600 and you know it's going to start in November, and maybe in July start like paying yourself that $600 by putting it in a savings account, and just to see how your cash flow goes and how things go for the month. And if you realize that there's just no way you're going to be able to make that, then that's your tip to make sure that you apply for an income-driven repayment plan so that you can lower that monthly payment. But I mean, the most important thing to do is to figure it out ahead of time. If you are someone who maybe also has private student loans, there's different grace periods depending on who the lender is, and just doing your homework to gather all of that information so you know what that expectation is going to be, and asking questions. If that payment is just unmanageable, then figure it out. But the most important thing to remember is that you're obligated to pay that money that you have borrowed, and you need to work towards making those payments.
I taught a first year seminar class at a previous institution, and we did an exercise where we talked about payments and bill paying. And I was surprised to learn that a lot of the students didn't know what types of bills would be monthly, what would be, if things would be biweekly, if things would be paid on an annual basis. Can you talk through just maybe some of the and I know it can be, okay, I know it can depend, but maybe some of how bills work, like are they monthly payments, what to expect when it comes to payments?
Okay. So before I explain it, I'm going to point out a resource that we have on our SDSU Extension website. It's an article called Developing a Budget or Spending Plan, and you can find it on the Family Finance or the Personal Finance webpage. It is a downloadable PDF, and so it has kind of steps for creating a budget. It also lists pretty much all your standard expenses, including occasional expenses. So anything that is associated with a basic need, so housing, transportation, food, clothing, those types of things, those are always going to be monthly expenses. Any loan payments are going to also be due on a monthly basis. Things like maybe insurance, you can set it up for monthly, but you can also set it up for quarterly or even annually and pay that premium in a lump sum. Things like if you think about throughout the year, some different things that you might do if there are holidays, or Christmas is a good example. Those, gift and decorating and whatever, those expenses are going to most likely be November, December. Um, Birthday gifts, that type of thing. Another thing that new grads, another big expense that new grads usually have is being invited to your friends' weddings. And whether you're just a guest or a part of the wedding party, that can be a for pretty significant expense too. you know, that's a great time of your life to be able to go to those types of events. But unless they're all in your hometown and they're all pretty simple, it's probably going to be an added expense, even just for a gift and then that travel. So those are some different things. So think of kind of what are some events that might be happening in your life. One thing I always tell people about a budget is it's very dynamic. So you can look and set up a budget based on what you think is happening in your life, and but plan that it's not probably going to happen that way, or there might be something unexpected come up. So you always want to plan a budget that includes savings so that you can kind of cover those unexpected. Another expense that might be a little bit more irregular would be healthcare expenses. If you could have that occasional, doctor's visit, maybe need some prescription or medication and things like that. So you can't, I always find it hard to plan a budget that includes absolutely every possible contingency. And, but regularly looking at a budget helps you figure out where you can make adjustments if necessary. So maybe you cut back on entertainment so that you can cover, you know, the wedding expenses or something like that. I don't know. Did that help? Did that answer the
Yeah, it does.
question? Okay.
My friends got married very young, so in my early 20s, I was often going to a lot of different weddings. And it can be expensive, especially when people start, drifting and moving to different parts of the country. I even just think about like visiting, like traveling to visit family or
Yep.
visit friends. I find that now my friends are spread and my family is spread pretty broadly across the country. And it is kind of overwhelming, like feeling like you want to try to visit people as much as possible, but you do have to budget for some of that travel. You should budget for the travel, and it does make it so that you kind of have to pick and choose who you see and when you see them. But
Yeah. So another thing is, when you've graduated is, you have so many different opportunities in front of you, but you are going to have to make some choices because money can be a limited resource. When we think about travel, think about, do you have the time that you can take off from work? You don't want to go with unpaid days because you most likely need to have that income. So even just planning for that, and it might get tough. You might have to make some tough decisions about what you can do and what you can't do too.
yeah, especially, you take a job that gives you, say, 10 vacation days or 10 paid days a month, but it does take some time for that to build up. And if you're constantly using it, it's going to be much harder to save up for, a bigger trip or an event that you have coming up. So, what would you say to someone whose first job maybe doesn't pay enough to cover all of their expenses?
That's tough. Having that budget and knowing what your expenses are will help you kind of know where the shortfall is. Uh, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Just really just focus on what are those basic needs. So making sure that you can pay your rent, that you can, have adequate food. Probably nothing fancy, but something adequate. You might have to, cut back on entertainment that costs money. You might have to be creative so that you're, not spending money. I always, tell people if there's a shortfall between income and expenses, you have kind of three options. Increase your income, decrease your expenses, or do a combination of both. So if it's a case where you have the ability to get a part-time job or a side hustle, I encourage that. If it's possible for you to, look at, sharing housing, um, work to reduce transportation expenses, hold on to that older car just a little bit longer, then, you know, um, really just you want to prioritize your basic needs and making sure, if you have making sure that you're covering the debt payments. So if you have student loans and your your income is really low, talking to the lenders or the loan servicers and letting them know what your situation is. And because there are options, if you're not like deferments and forbearances, and just seeing what that situation is and just tackling it before it's a problem. So trying not to ignore the situation as uncomfortable as you might feel with, having to, it's like, oh, you might feel really bad because you can't pay your bills, but tackling it by, calling the lender, um, maybe making changes in your housing or anything like that so that you can reduce your expenses. That's why it's so important to have an idea of what those expenses are before you start the job or before are looking, so you have an idea of what your income needs are going to be. So it's a tough situation, and it's it's really uncomfortable, and I think more people are in that situation than we realize, and it can just make for just I don't know, a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress associated with finances. So kind of dealing with it, seeking out some help if you need help, just looking at a budget, is another way you can do that too.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So I think kind of along those lines, but maybe a little bit different. What are some financial maybe red flags that new grads should be watching for? Some bad credit card habits or lifestyle habits that you typically warn or kind of help them steer clear of?
Mhm. I would say stay away from use of credit cards if possible. It, you know, credit cards do help you build your credit score and your credit history. But if you can't handle the bills, then um, you want to maybe not not rely on them. So I would say the first is don't if you have that gap in income and expenses, don't rely on credit cards to fill that gap because you're obligating future income for who knows how long to pay that credit card debt. You know, if you are in a situation where you use your credit card and pay it off right away, that's kind of another situation. I would say lifestyle habits is just realizing what you can handle and making the decision, understanding what the trade-off is. If your best friend is having a wedding and you really want to be able to be there for your best friend, figure out how much it costs, figure out what are some ways you can reduce your expenses, make a plan for it, and then either work a little bit more or really scale back on some other expenses so that you can do that. If a friend invites you to, a really great, amazing concert and the ticket's $200, then you might just have to say no, um, but know that it's not forever. I mean, knowing what your financial situation is by, knowing what tracking your income, tracking your expenses is going to help you really stay away from some of those situations that might get you into financial trouble. Because if you know you can't meet your expenses this month, or you know that you're meeting them, but it's pretty tight, taking on another big expense is not going to make next month better. It's just you're going to still have to be dealing with the same situations plus that maybe additional debt that you might have. Uh, if something sounds too good to be true in terms of earning income, it most likely is. Um, Work really hard to avoid uh, frauds or scams, because that can just really cut into your finances. Pay attention to, keeping your information private. All those standard things of not responding to random phone calls or text messages or emails from people you don't know. Um, keeping making sure you have secure passwords and that type of thing, because that can completely derail you if you're scammed.
Yeah, I even think if there's a recent trend going around with having AI create pictures of you as like a doll or a Barbie doll, and um, it has a bunch of like your favorite things, like all the things that you like, and I just think people need to be really careful about giving that much personal information out there, like the names of your pets, things that are common passwords. When
Yeah.
you start putting all those hobbies and interests into kind of like onto the internet, people can start, trying to guess passwords or know a little bit more about you than maybe we want the whole internet to know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I've seen those recently and think, oh, that's cute, but that's a good point.
I guess we've talked a little bit about avoiding some lifestyle habits, but any ways that recent grads or, folks moving off campus but coming back next year, any, tips on building healthy money habits that are going to kind of last?
Mhm. Well, the one of the things that I always tell people to do is to track your spending. And because it gives you that control over what you're doing. So if you know how much you're spending, and this is probably more for that flexible spending. So the, food, entertainment, going out to eat, clothing, even transportation, basic necessities, but looking at how much you're spending on that. If you're tracking your spending and then reviewing that information, that can really help you figure out, is there some place that I might need to cut, or, are things going really good and this is good. And so then if you do have to have some kind of unexpected expense come up, um, you kind of know where you can cut back a little bit on some different things. I think just having a spending plan and paying attention to it. So, looking at our money, we have to have money. We are spending it in order to get the things that we need to take care of ourselves. But if we're not actually paying attention to it and paying attention to our habits and our, how our spending habits specifically, we can end up really just being derailed. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as our, our physical health. If we're, not paying attention to what we eat, not really paying attention to how, what we exercise, I mean, we can create some health problems. And, you know, there are so many different ways to track our spending to that are really easy, like with different apps, even just resources from our bank, um, with the apps and budget plans and those types of things. So, really just paying attention to it. But the other thing is then learning what your style is. Everybody has a little bit different style on managing finances. Everybody has different values that they want to be able to maintain, and your finances play into that. So as you are transitioning to a different situation, so whether it's moving off campus or if it's graduating and starting that professional job, it's just paying attention to like how you like to do things, how you like to spend money, what are your priorities, and what are you willing to maybe give up in order to be able to focus on your priorities. And really it's a big transition for people, and I don't think we necessarily realize that. So just learning and figuring out, and don't start out by um, buying a whole bunch of furniture and buying a brand new car and a new computer and a new phone and a new wardrobe. I mean, those are all great things that are probably maybe needed depending on what your situation is, but do some planning for it and pay attention to really what you need and for your situation and what's important to you.
Well, and I think a lot too, it kind of goes back to that, you know, mindful consumption, and realizing that, yeah, you probably, if you're starting a professional job, maybe you will need some business casual outfits, but that doesn't mean they have to be brand new. That doesn't mean they have to be, there's a lot of really great options. I find that business casual are often the most, easy to find at thrift stores. And so just
Right?
even being willing to go to a thrift store and get your clothing there for the first little bit until you've, kind of got your feet under you and you know what your income's looking like.
Mhm.
I think that that's a really good one. And just realizing that not everything has to be brand new and not everything has to be what the latest trend on social media, because we know those trends come and go. And, you're going to buy something and then a month later, it's not going to be in style anymore. And so
Yeah.
sticking with things that make you feel good, but also that, are healthy for your budget.
Yeah. And know that your financial situation is going to change. As a new professional, you're most likely going to have pay increases, you're going to have advancements. Um, maybe you're going to change jobs. And so your finances is going to adjust with that. And just always really just being, paying attention to your finances, just like you're paying attention to your health. And uh, I don't know.
I think that's
That's
wonderful. I do also think, I was thinking back to you were talking about, just kind of looking and reviewing your spending. And one thing that came to my mind, my bank actually offers like it's a separate app, but it is part of the bank, and it's a budgeting app, and it lets you see visually in like charts and graphs what you're spending. And sometimes I think, when I'm looking through my recent spending, just like through like my online banking, and I'm seeing numbers, that's one thing. But when you see like, oh, my like groceries, because I love like I'm a foodie, I love to cook, and so I spend a lot on groceries. But my grocery spending is, really high versus, something else is a little bit lower. And even just being able to like use it, like see it visually in
Right.
maybe a chart. If you're a visual learner, if you like to see things visually, that might be a good place to start too, just to see where is everything adding up and what does it look like visually, to see it laid out in
Yeah.
like a pie chart of what my
Yeah.
spending comes out to.
Yeah, that's why those apps are so good. And there's so many. I mean, even like I get, notifications on this is how much money you spent on your credit card and what the different expenses were. But so your example is really good where you're going to spend more money on food because you like to cook. That's an important value for you. And so, maybe you don't spend much on going out to eat because you like to cook. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Maybe you spend more on groceries than the next person does, but an important value for you. So then your trade-off is that you don't spend much on some other things. And so tracking your spending doesn't always mean you're in trouble or you're making mistakes. Tracking your spending helps you become more aware of your spending so you can make better decisions and have a little bit more control over your finances.
Any last advice or tips that you wanted to give before we end our conversation, or any resources you wanted to shout out?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, for all of you who are graduating, congratulations. You've worked really hard the last 4 or 5 years, and you're starting a new path, and I have a lot of exciting things ahead for you. If you are in need of some financial assistance or some financial resources, I've already mentioned our SDSU Extension website. It's extension.sdstate.edu, and you can look under the Wellness tab for personal finance information. I am also an accredited financial counselor and provide financial counseling for anyone. There's information about that on that webpage. What that means is you meet with me for an hour or two just to go over a budget, talk about managing your student loans, look at kind of any questions you might have related to your finances, and maybe just doing an overview. So those are some good resources. Also, for those of you who will still be on campus, there's the Cash Course website that has a lot information about budgeting, spending, saving, expenses, student loans, all that good stuff that is available for all SDSU students.
Thank you so much, Lorna. It's always great to talk with you, and I really appreciate all of your information.
Well, thanks, Caitlin. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Today's processing questions are: what are 2 habits that recent grads should be aware of as they graduate and be mindful of reducing overuse and spending? What are 2 resources that students and graduates can use to help them organize and better budget their spending?
Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.